War has become a mutually assured suicide. The weapons of war have become too powerful not to have a suicidal effect. The engines of war have all become useless junk. Their destructive force has become too great for humanity to endure. They cannot be seriously used except to commit suicide. As the last F-14 Tomcat leaves the aircraft carrier USS Theodore Roosevelt, the game of war should have been stopped right then. We wield weapons out of impotence, not strength. We build weapons because we cannot build peace. And we cannot build peace because we all live like slaves, slaves to the cesspool of empire. Wars are demanded by the masters of the cesspool of empire, in the surface of empire. Wars are instigated by empire to prevent human development, which dooms the system of empire to its very core. We build weapons because of our inability to stand up against empire that renders the whole of humanity as slaves. Empire is the only real enemy that humanity has. We wield the weapons to defeat one another, not to defeat our enemy. And the greater the power is that we invest into the weaponry, the more we stand defeated by it. War has never produced one iota of good or strengthened civilization. In the age of nuclear weapons, we stand absolutely defeated. Nuclear weapons are indefensible weapons. It is pure illusion to even imagine that any kind of defense is possible against nuclear weapons once the trigger is pulled. They are designed and built as extinction weapons. They serve no one except the plans of empire, and those plans call for depopulation. That's the policy of empire. Nothing has basically changed in the relationship between empire and humanity. The scale has changed slightly. The weapon now is thermonuclear war. It has been maintained as an indefensible weapon. The weapon is still wielded by empire, by fascism. It is still targeting humanity. Why do we maintain those weapons aimed at us? Why have we joined hands with empire? We are already pulling the trigger to some degree. We are burning the food that humanity is producing while production is increasingly curtailed. We are burning food massively in the form of biofuels. In our world, where 1 billion people are living in chronic starvation, we are burning food that would normally feed 100 million people. We are murdering those whose food we burn. The process is called suicide. Suicide is the mark of a defeated society. The Holocaust has already begun. The larger Holocaust to murder 6,000 million is just another step forward on the path that we are already on. The weapons are actively deployed. They are already targeting us. The process has begun. Yes, the Western society has become a defeated society, defeated by empire. Its hard-won founding Renaissance ideals of sovereignty, liberty, and humanity appear to mean nothing anymore. Humanity has become slaves, imprisoned by empire. Humanity is holding a gun to its head, saluting the weapon. While we still have time to choose our future, to build on our heritage, to uplift civilization, the time for choosing is running short. The critical reversal on this path to hell begins with the process of retrospection and introspection. It can raise the platform of our humanity, sovereignty and liberty to enable us to pull our politics up to higher ground. If we fail to dramatically uplift ourselves, our extinction may result. The engines of war have become immensely powerful over the years. The annihilation of Eurasia can now be accomplished from a single one of America's Ohio-class nuclear missile submarines. This single submarine can dispense a maximum of 240 warheads, each with 30 times greater destructive force than the Hiroshima bomb had. The USA operates 14 of these, 6 in the Atlantic and 8 in the Pacific. The missiles have a range of more than 11,000 kilometers. More than half the population of the world lives in Asia. While there may not be enough high-value targets for the warheads of 14 submarines and 440 silo-based Minuteman missiles, since most of the population lives in widely dispersed rural communities, the super-concentrated radioactive fallout will likely kill them all nevertheless. Russia has the most widely dispersed population. In this giant land of nearly 17 million square kilometers, stretched across 9 time zones and 8,000 kilometers distance, has a minute population of only 144 million. This compares to less than half of that of the USA. After the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia was so intensively looted by the forces of empire that it suffered a population collapse by starvation of 1 to 2 million people per year. Russia recovered itself and will now not bow down to the cesspool again. China has had a long history of suffering under the old British Empire, defeated by the Opium Wars, which severely devastated the nation. It recovered and will not bend to the will of the cesspool again. Its fast-growing economy is a threat to empire, which is itself in the last stages of collapsing. In the war of empire versus humanity, China is a prime target. India has suffered tremendously under the rule of the British Empire and did not gain its freedom until it was split apart and divided as a final act before it was allowed to have its sovereignty back, which is still developing. India does not stand with empire anymore, and, as it has been said in many ways, who does not stand with empire is deemed to stand against it and finds itself on the strategic target list. The nuclear weapons in the Ohio-class submarines have potentially all of these countries' names written on the target lists. The Ohio-class is not the largest submarine in the world, but it is the most efficient killer in the world. It carries the most missiles with the most warheads. This weapon is the best weapon yet created for the intention for which thermonuclear weapons are wielded en masse, namely the destruction of civilization and the mass killing of humanity. We should never forget that we carry the weapons, not as a result of strength, but as an acknowledgement of our impotence to live as sovereign human beings in a world free of empire. The terror of the nuclear weapon threatens our extinction. This threat is intended to force humanity as a whole to become compliant to the demands of empire. However, history has also shown that such compliance means mass depopulation and the destruction of civilization by policy. Therefore, until humanity gains its freedom from empire, the weapons will remain on the human scene. America is no longer sovereign. It stands mired in the cesspool and has become a slave to it. It provides the weapons for mass destruction that the cesspool demands. Imprisoned into empire, America once stood ready to nuke the Soviet Union off the map. That's what started the Cold War. The nukes became an anti-sovereignty weapon, a weapon to force all the nations of the world to bow to the dictates of empire and to march through this door to their grave, as the EU nations are presently doing. For as long as society finds itself impotent to live free from empire as human beings, the weapons will remain. Empire has so far been successful in assuring the impotence of all the nations under its thumb, and to exploit them, to blackmail them. The danger is that with empire fast collapsing itself, its masters will order its stooges to pull the trigger. When we built the nuclear bombs, we said to ourselves that nobody would be as crazy as to push the button to launch them. Now this threshold has been crossed. An American president, mentally impaired with a severe case of narcissistic personality disorder, holds the button to ignite thermonuclear war. And he is preaching war and threatening Syria, Iran, Russia, and China. No one can survive the outcome of that, not to mention the inevitable retaliation. The extinction of humanity is almost guaranteed thereby. Humanity has approximately 27,000 strategic warheads deployed against itself, and an additional 30,000 tactical nuclear warheads. The launching of the strategic firestorm may be completely automated once the command is given. And the game has been set up on such a hair-trigger basis, that the command to start a counterstrike must be given in minutes, since the modern submarines bring the missiles practically to the doorstep of their target. The targeting of the missiles is applied on board of the sub by computer control, probably from the ship's control room. The ship remains in communications with Central Command, where the target patterns are generated. The communication with the Central Command remains active even in the submerged state. Most likely, no one in the control room knows which targets are selected for any specific launch. The officers will enter the numbers and press the buttons as directed by protocol. It could also be that the entire launch process is automated and is controlled from afar. This might be done in order to enable precisely timed global strike synchronization. It is extremely unlikely that any human decision element is involved at the local level on board the submarine from where the mass annihilation deed is done. Nothing is likely left to be controlled at the local level in order to assure that no human element will be involved that can block the implementation of the war in the final stages of its unfolding. War, by design to be more effective, has become a form of automated murdering. The missiles, once they are launched, will rise out of the oceans. At this stage, the intended Armageddon cannot be stopped, not in practice. Within 2.5 minutes, the Trident missile will climb to 300,000 feet and reach a speed of over 16,000 kilometers an hour. Interception is theoretically still possible at this stage, right to the end of the buzzing phase. In practice, this is the easiest possible defense, but even here, success is extremely precarious. The boost phase of the missile is typically short, in the range of 3 to 4 minutes. After the burnout of the third stage of the booster, the warheads can be dispersed. The earlier they are dispersed, the more difficult will be the interception of the incoming fury. The released warheads are inside tiny projectiles, slightly larger than artillery shells, flying at a speed of 25,000 kilometers an hour. At this speed, they are nearly impossible to intercept. Still, efforts are made in the hope that this can be done one day. An attempt is being made to build some sort of midpoint interception system in Alaska against the silo-based Russian missiles. The defense is linked to the DO line, which is presently nothing more than just an attempt with a totally uncertain effectiveness and durability. It might perhaps have a chance to block an accidentally launched single missile, but not a whole fleet coming in at once. The DO line, the distant early warning radar line in the north, has not been designed as a barrier, but as a warning system to enable an instant counterstrike. Of course, against submarine-based launches from undetermined locations, the chances for a midpoint detection, not to mention interception, are near zero. The only reliable defense that is possible in this entire theater of nuclear war is to eliminate the underlying intention that drives the world into war. Nuclear war is essentially an intention that flows from the cultural disease called empire. For as long as the disease remains and the intention thereby remains, no one is safe. A reliable ground-based defense is presently not possible, nor would a reliable defense system ever be implemented for as long as empire rules, even if this was possible. A potentially effective defense system was proposed in the 1980s, but as soon as it was proposed, it was vehemently opposed by both the Eastern and Western powers. The blocking force was empire. Empire had controlled both the East and the West from behind the scene. A wide-ranging international cooperative development effort had been proposed in the 1980s that would have created a fast-acting, laser-driven, space-based interception system based on new physical principles that promised to be several orders of magnitude more efficient than the offensive systems. The proposal had been developed by Lyndon LaRouche and had been adopted by President Ronald Reagan as America's SDI project. The idea was to create a jointly developed worldwide project to protect all the people of the world against the folly of war. The project would become a science driver that would uplift the economies of all the nations contributing to it. The idea had initially been welcomed in the relevant Soviet and American circles, but under political pressure from the empire of oligarchy, the proposal was powerfully opposed, with both the East and West joining hands against it, shutting it down. The Soviet Union would have survived had it agreed to the building of a global security system against nuclear missiles. Instead, its refusing to defend itself, and humanity with it, led to its doom by the same forces that demanded the refusal. Millions of people paid for the consequences with their life when the vultures of empire looted the entire Soviet sphere to the bone after it had collapsed. All this could have been avoided by building an effective defensive system for the whole of humanity against empire. But it wasn't done. The political pressure to block humanity joining hands for its global defense against nuclear war was so immense at the time that the proposal was mocked as a joke in the Western media, and the Soviets were coerced to demand that the American author of the SDI proposal, Lyndon LaRouche, be eliminated as effectively as possible to kill the proposal. While the attempted assassination of LaRouche failed, he was nevertheless railroaded into prison on a 15-year drummed-up sentence. In the shadow of this grotesque intervention, which had sent shockwaves through the world at the time, the SDI was quietly terminated. With it, the global suicide potential was allowed to continue. The hasty termination of the very idea of a global defense of humanity against nuclear war illustrates the intention behind the unrelenting push for nuclear war flowing from the cultural disease called empire. The intention clearly was, and still is, that the major nations of the world commit mutually assured suicide. That's all what nuclear weapons can assure. They fulfill not a single constructive purpose. To date, no space-based defense system exists against nuclear weapons, nor does a reliable defense exist against nuclear warheads in their terminal phase as they approach the target areas. A reliable target zone defense is not possible in practice. Near the target zone, the well-protected warheads enter the atmosphere from space at a speed exceeding 25,000 kilometers an hour. Any attempt to target the tiny warheads at this point makes shooting a bullet out of the sky seem easy in comparison. While this feat has supposedly been accomplished in some rare individual cases, no operational system exists to do this reliably and universally across an entire country or continent. Thus, to the present day, nuclear weapons remain for all practical considerations what they have been from the beginning: indefensible weapons. And they are protected to remain that. Kepler would say that the imperial doctrine of nuclear war is to assure that the vulnerability of society remains assured. In order to assure the mutually inflicted suicide potential of the nations, rather than to protect the nations and society itself. With the now ever more increasing focus on depopulation as a policy, the age of deterrence has ended. In the past, the policy of mutually assured destruction had kept the genie of war in the bottle, while the ground was slowly being prepared for the global suicide plan to succeed. The fear of an assured retaliation has prevented the first strike option for more than 50 years. But now, with the increasing cries for depopulation being uttered from the camps of empire, the assured destruction that has been carefully prepared for has become the desired goal by the master policymakers. The nuclear strategic game has changed thereby. The game has changed because the end game of empire has begun. With the depopulation ideology now on the table, the long relied on defense strategy has become a mutual suicide assurance instead. The deterrence that had prevented war by creating ever more devastating weapons has become a death trap for the whole of humanity. The only hope for humanity now lies with the success in physically preventing the death weapons it has created from becoming launched. This means that the weapons launch platforms must be destroyed by all means and in the fastest and most efficient manner at the first sign of trouble, in order to prevent them from unloading their deadly fury that the masters of empire clearly wish to bring upon humanity. Russia has responded in this context to protect Syria when the war threats against Syria and Iran exploded, and this explosion was orchestrated in the shadow of the Polish ABM crisis, and also in the shadow of the murder of Gaddafi, the head of Libya, and the orchestrated regime change. Russia needs close ties with Syria for strategic defense purposes against ballistic missiles being launched from the Mediterranean. Russia may have seen the orchestrated uprising in Syria and the escalated call for regime change by force as a veiled strategic attack against Russia. The so-called Arab Spring started in response to the widening economic crisis that resulted from the ever greater looting of the nations by the forces of empire, which many people blame on their local governments. The resulting unrest enabled al-Qaeda-type operations to be infiltrated and to be run against the Arab world. The externally supported forces toppled Egypt, destroyed Libya, then created havoc on demand in Syria, and all the while the masters of empire, via Israel, were targeting Iran ever more boisterously. Naturally, it didn't escape Russia's attention that the deeper target behind the war drive is Russia. The underlying strategic objective is probably obvious to everyone who has his eyes open, as it is only thinly concealed. Against this background, in order to expand the escalating threat against Russia still further, 4 of America's superclass aircraft carrier groups were added to the orchestrated crisis scene in the Middle East, all 4 of them at the same time. And this was done while the President of Israel, returning from a visit to London, stated his intention to start the bombing of Iran's nuclear facilities. Russia stepped up to the plate of threats and immediately blocked the rush to war. Its government intervened with naval forces to prevent the Western war against Syria from taking off. The Russian president also ordered Russia's only aircraft carrier into the region. The carrier came with the military capacity to prevent any offensive force being used in the Mediterranean against both Syria and Russia. The American strike groups in the Indian Ocean may have encountered a similar response. It might be for this reason that still one more American aircraft carrier group is being readied to join the groups already in the Indian Ocean. Russia evidently depends on Syria as a technology base for an early warning detection of missiles being launched from the Mediterranean against the Russian heartland. Iran is evidently valuable to Russia also as a technology base for missile launch detection from the Arabian Sea. How the currently escalating war game will play itself out, with Israel and the USA being pushed to start the bombing of Iran, is impossible to predict. The controlling agency in this game is not the US president. The line that controls the president is deeply anchored in the sewer of empire where the man for the presidency has been selected for his Nero-like qualities and has been richly financed into power and placed onto the throne on the typical highway of electoral abuses and so on. This means that the war drive that we now see today is not of American origin, but is imposed on America through the purchased president who owns the button that starts the war. But will he be obeyed? One thing seems to be fairly certain. If one observes Russia's reaction, especially after its election victory, which empire lost this time, that Russia will spare no effort to prevent American nuclear missile submarines from dispensing their deadly load from the Mediterranean, regardless of who controls the button in America. However, for how long Russia will remain successful in its effort to block the American war plans in the Middle East remains to be seen, which Russia regards as being directed against it, and rightfully so. The war game is evidently on and is still moving ahead. The implementation is escalating. All options, and this includes all nuclear options, have been placed on the table. This has been openly stated and repeated like a broken record. The surest way, therefore, to prevent the war from the American side would be to dethrone the American towel boys of the masters of empire who out of the deep of their cultural cesspool hate humanity, who demand their agreed long-standing depopulation policy to be carried out. In real terms, the people who are committed to the master's plan are few, but those few who sold their soul to serve the plan have all been elevated to the highest posts with rich financial backing from the sewer. There appears to be a consensus among them to go to war, but this consensus is fake too. It has been imposed. The plan is not their own. The plan needs to be scrapped before it takes on a life of its own and sequences on to its bitter end, which may be near, just as the wars against Afghanistan and Iraq have become a force that no one had been able to halt. Humanity cannot let this happen this time around, which may require a major house cleaning in the halls of power, of a type that is innovative, asymmetric, and has never been attempted before. Almost all of us in Western society live as it were with our hands folded behind our back in the critical respects, except to salute the weapon, Society has been well taught to salute its weapons. It does so while a plan to use them is imposed on it. Instead of society taking control of its destiny, it allows a plan imposed on it to take control of its destiny with a fate that all people would hate if the plan would be in the open, which they find themselves instead supporting. Against the background of this kind of sad tendency in respect to nuclear war, that was evident already in the 1980s, I started writing a novel to explore the phenomenon. I did this right at the height of the Cold War, when the world lived precariously in such a state of self-denial. We had 65,000 bombs hanging over our head in those days, with a plan in progress to use them at a moment's notice. Fear was the deterrence then, not the power of our humanity. We said to ourselves, we can move in the direction of mutually assured destruction with complete impunity, because the insurance of the nuclear horror would prevent the outbreak of war. We dreamed then that when the moment would come when the bluff would be called, we would be able to back down and call the game off. I started my novel for countering the nuclear war threat with precisely this kind of setup, which sadly still describes us today. Perhaps even more so today than it did then. The novel begins with a plan being imposed onto a low-ranking officer of a Russian missile base. A patriot at heart, he is cleverly inspired to accept a plan that he despises from his very soul. But he makes it his own, even while he hates it, and dreams that he can escape it at any time he wants to. He sees himself placed under implied orders by high-level officials of his government to carry this plan out. All the means for the plans are placed into his lap. The plan is for a missile to be launched during an alertness exercise. He is assured that it would be safe to do this, even for the Americans, as no actual targeting would be applied to a falsely launched missile. He understands the concept. He is assured that without targeting applied, the missile would not disperse its warhead, but simply fall with them all together into the sea or into a desert without anything exploding. He is further assured that the resulting close call with Armageddon would powerfully shake the world to its senses. If an honest accident was staged, he is assured there would be no retaliation. Inasmuch as the man hates the plan and fears it, he also sees it as a potential savior of the world. He sees his plan as being able to pull a precarious world teetering at the edge of a crisis away from the abyss. Thus, in obedience to what he sees to be the wish of high-ranking people in high places in government, he moves ahead and lets the plan unfold, all the while saying to himself that he is in control and able to call the plan off at any time, right to the last moment. He says to himself that in this manner he keeps his options open. In the final moment, however, in the flood of emotions, he finds himself no longer in control of his actions. The plan that has been patiently prepared and rehearsed to the finest detail is in control of him by then, and so, in the final critical moment, he simply lets his fingers push the lever down. At this point, the deed is done. He stands in awe before the flames, bewildered, as his missile shakes the ground and rises into the sky. Unknown to him, targeting had been applied. The missile, similar to a maximum configured SS-18, is on the way to the American Northwest, targeting Seattle, Bellevue, Tacoma, Olympia, Everett, Aberdeen, Montesano, Bellingham, the Oak Harbor Naval Air Base, the Trident Base at Bangor, the Hanford Nuclear Reservation at Pasco. At this point, no one can stop what is about to happen, though attempts are made right to the final moment before the tragedy. In the novel, no retaliation by the USA is launched, which is possible only in the world of fiction, and even there, just barely. In the novel, the fallout, like the ashfall from the last volcanic eruption of Mount St. Helens, is carried by the jet streams to the east, where the bulk of the American population lives, which becomes hastily evacuated as much as this can be arranged. All of Canada and much of the USA suffer the same fate, and since the novel is pure fiction in which only a single missile is launched, Europe and Asia remain intact as an oasis for the refugees to flee to. The nations there struggle to accommodate the 100 million refugees that were able to be transported to safety out of the 300 million affected by the fallout. Such an oasis is possible only in fiction. The portion of the fallout that wouldn't settle across the continent would be looped up into the Arctic according to the general pattern of the jet streams. In real terms, no oasis would result. Russia has 57 of the type of missiles that the novel describes, and many times more on submarines. They would all be devoted to disable the USA. It would be fictional to the extreme to assume that all of these missiles are presently not in high alert status, given the political status as it is today, and that they would not all be launched in response to an aggression, or even just a perceived aggression. It would likewise be extremely fictional to assume that America's 404 Minuteman missiles would not be instantly launched at the moment of an aggression. They would all be launched before they would be vulnerable to be destroyed in their silo. Each of these carries a warhead that is 30 times more destructive than the Hiroshima bomb had been. For as long as the plan remains in control, for which these missiles and warheads were built and nurtured for decades, the lever, of whatever type it may be, will be pushed down when the circumstances converge that demand such an action. This would happen both in America and in Russia. It would likewise be fictional then to assume that the fallout from the 450 nuclear explosions, each 30 times bigger than Hiroshima, which are planned for the destruction of Eurasia, together with the 2,500 warheads residing in American submarines, would not thickly blanket North America with highly radioactive fallout within a few days, spreading long-enduring deadly effects. The jet streams would assure the rapid hemispheric distribution of the fallout muck. The action of the launching of America's nearly 3,000 strategic warheads would become a blowback forced act of suicide. Kepler would say that we are insane playing those games when the resulting certainty of our doom stares us into the face. Nuclear war is a game of suicide in the greatest of all fires in the history of humanity. It is to be carried out by a plan that has been in preparation for decades and is being ever more readily put onto the table. Kepler would point out that nuclear war is a suicide project, a global depopulation project, according to the thinly hidden plan. He would point out to us that depopulation has been on the ideological agenda for 200 years already, though the means to carry it out hadn't existed then, but exist today aplenty. He would call us liars when we speak of deterrence, and we do indeed lie. When the world goes up in smoke, the survivors trained in the art of modern lying would call the tragedy a failure of deterrence. That's a lie. In real terms, Kepler would point out that tragedy would be the result of the failure of society to honor its humanity. He would say that if this honoring of our humanity had been in the foreground, it would have caused us to stop the plan in its tracks, or we would have never allowed it to exist in the first place. When a single one of America's 14 or higher class submarines with its 24 missiles and 240 warheads, each 30 times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb had been, can all by itself end the existence of civilization across Eurasia and ultimately across the world, then we are dealing with a plan in progress that is absolutely anti-human. When a tiny fraction of the 27,000 nuclear warheads that are presently still deployed by the world's nuclear weapons nations, most of which are destined for the USA, Europe, Russia and China, then we are dealing with a committed plan to carry out the murder of those 6 billion people, the very number by which the master of empire say the world is overpopulated. Don't you think there is a connection between the two? Any spark of nuclear war, which instantly becomes a full-scale nuclear war, as the doctrine of mutually assured destruction assures, would likely cause the extinction of humanity. Kepler would say, "Can you see that the plan that you actively serve is designed to assure your collective annihilation?" And Kepler might also warn us about the delusion that the leaders will not press the button for the nations to commit suicide. Kepler would alert us that forcing mass genocide is already a way of life in the Western Empire that is committed to burning ever more of humanity's food in the form of biofuels. The agricultural resources that are being burned in this manner would normally feed 100 million people. In a world in which 1 billion people are forced to live in chronic starvation, the mass burning of food on the present scale is already unleashing a silent holocaust in which 100 million people are put to death every year. This isn't theoretical, something that might be. It is here now. The Holocaust is happening. The biofuels project is a suicide project by intention, because the burning of agricultural resources that would become animal feed has shut down countless meat-producing feedlot operations, taking critical nutritional resources off the shelf and off society's dinner table. This plan for genocide becoming suicide is already on the move and is far advanced. The critical animal protein in human nutrition is increasingly becoming unaffordable, while nothing is done to stop the genocide that is becoming ever more suicidal. How close are we then already to the final step? Suppose that an extremely limited nuclear war would break out, perhaps accidentally, in which only a few of the major nations' biggest cities were to be hit. We would face a tragedy of unimaginable proportions if this was happening. The big cities are among the first to strike high-value targets, such as the cities of Beijing, Tokyo, and New Delhi. The destroyed cities would most likely also include Moscow, at the heart of Russia, although Moscow does have a defensive shield deployed around it. Moscow is one of the few cities for which a defense is attempted. The rest of the cities of the world have no defenses, including Paris and London, the big cities of the war crier nations. In real terms, this wouldn't matter, as nuclear war cannot be stopped at the minimalistic state, but becomes total, universal annihilation. New York City would, of course, be on top of that list of the first targets to be hit, since the USA would likely be the agent that starts the nuclear war in proxy for its masters. The resulting death toll of the imaginary minimalistic scenario, in the range of 50 to 70 million people being killed, would nevertheless be so horrendous that the consequences would cause civilization to collapse. I am laying this scenario before you because the enormous catastrophe of this horrendous scenario would only add up to slightly over half of the murdering that is already being carried out every single year in the silent holocaust that the masters of the cesspool impose on the world with the burning of humanity's food in a starving world, which the masters of empire mandate. My point is that we have lost far too much of our humanity already, which is evident in our allowing this biofuels crime against humanity to happen, which we willingly participate in at the gas pumps, even while, as the result, the food prices are going through the roof. We stand in the world as a defeated humanity, defeated by the fascist cesspool of empire that is totally devoid of the faintest shred of humanity, which hates humanity and demands depopulation, meaning extermination by policy on an ever wider horizon. The great pacifist of empire, Bertrand Russell, who lamented that wars don't kill enough people, even the big wars, would be proud of our modern society, which now answers Russell's lament with the burning of its food with the kind of indifference that has put the whole of humanity on a path to ever bigger things to come, towards its already prepared for self-extinction in a real nuclear war, in which not just 8, but 25,000 nuclear bombs would play an active role. My point is that we don't have a hope of avoiding a nuclear war unless we rediscover and redevelop our humanity that we have already lost. We need this done to get us off the present path to hell. The path that we are on which the biofuels holocaust is just another step along the way, has an end. And this end is our self-extinction, which is much more imminent than it is generally imagined to be. The difference from where we are to the final step is not radical. It is just a difference in scale of the already ongoing process. Sure, it won't be easy to get our humanity back, to get off the path to Armageddon where we commit suicide in the end, because universal suicide is the Master's plan. The Masters want us to stay on track until our extinction is complete. Their plan is thinly veiled. But instead of getting itself off this path, society remains actively committed to every facet of the plan to destroy itself, including committing economic suicide. The imposition of economic suicide has been on the agenda of empire for a long time already. It is presently cutting deeper and deeper into the fabric of society as the plan moves ahead. On this path, nuclear suicide would then be merely another step forward, in the direction already established and committed to. It wouldn't be anything different in principle, in comparison with what is already in progress. It would only be a tad more radical, though the same in nature, and be a bit more effective towards essentially the same end. China, which is one of the smallest players in the nuclear war game, has all by itself enough firepower to eradicate the USA, probably twice over. However, like India and Russia, China doesn't subscribe to the insane depopulation ideology that the British-centered Western Empire is intensely promoting and pursuing. The people outside the realm of empire wish and struggle to survive, which the West no longer does. Thus, the plan of empire is to assure that these nations won't be survivors either, but become drawn into the Western suicide package. Kepler would counsel us to be honest with ourselves about the game that has ensnared our sanity, our freedom, our humanity, and our future. Open your eyes, he would shout if he lived today. But even then, would anybody listen? The entire Western world is presently fully committed to its economic and financial suicide at the bidding of the masters of empire. The ongoing economic suicide is already having immensely deadly effects at the fringes of the population, while the worst is still to come. The phenomenon is now rushing inwards from the fringes to engulf ever more people. Economic suicide at the bidding of empire has become a national pandemic in far too many nations. It has become a kind of universally accepted death pact, even while it is easily prevented. When the final call eventually comes to press the nuclear button in order to complete the process, no one will intervene to stay the hand at this final moment. Society has assured itself of that with its mile-long track record in failing itself in countless lesser cases where it should have defended its humanity. And so, one or the other of the modern Hitlers or Neros and so on, of which we now have many, will push the button down. There is simply no commitment apparent anywhere in the Western world towards ending society's commitment to inflicting suicide on itself, which it has become coerced to accept instead of defending itself against it. If we did care about our humanity, as Kepler would suggest we should, we would discover that the current commitment to suicide, thinly veiled as a depopulation ideology, is a political game that was launched as far back as the 1790s, in the shadow of the U.S. Constitution becoming established. The American Constitution had for the first time in history set the stage for the freedom of mankind from the control of the empire of oligarchy. This caused outrage in the cesspool. The British Empire had begun in those days to set itself up to become the global world empire. It couldn't tolerate the American ideals. It needed a powerful, asymmetric approach to block the unfolding freedom trend that America had begun. The cesspool of Venice came to the rescue. The depopulation ideology was put on the table by Gian Maria Ortiz, a Venetian monk. He likened humanity to a bunch of dumb kettles that outgrow their pasture and thereby destroy it, and destroy with it the means for their existence. This clever asymmetric attack on humanity became the ideological orientation of the entire empire apparatus to the present day. The invented carrying capacity ideology denies the creative and productive power of the human being that enables a world population to exist that far exceeds what the natural earth could support. Since the masters of empire fear the creative and productive capacity of humanity like the plague, and rightfully so, as it dooms the system of oligarchy and empire to its very core, the masters have always aimed to destroy this capacity of humanity. They found that an effective method towards this end is to lower society's perception of itself to that of an animal. The depopulation ideology has been developed for this goal. For as long as this insane type of ideology rules, as we find it concocted in the cesspool of Venice, the plan for nuclear war will remain on the table, and the doom of mankind is increasingly assured thereby. This outcome is presently precariously close. The intentional lowering of the human spirit to ever more primitive levels of self-perceptions puts society onto the fast track to hell, because it no longer guards the button for nuclear war that opens the gate to extinction. External forces now control the button. But who are they? And how can society get its control back? These questions may be the most critical questions in the cultural wasteland that Western civilization has turned into. Indeed, who really owns the button that unlocks the world's largest military machine? The question of who owns the button is becoming increasingly critical now that a war is knocking at the gate, and the great engines of war stand in position on the front line to strike at a moment's notice. So one needs to ask again, who really owns the button? The answer is uncertain. In searching for an answer, a great tragedy comes to light, because the man who is authorized to control the American button that ends civilization in the space of a coffee break is a mentally impaired person with an extreme case of narcissistic personality disorder. That's how he has been professionally diagnosed. This poses grave dangers for the whole of humanity, because a man inflicted with such an impairment doesn't own himself as a healthy human being would. The narcissistic personality disorder is a serious mental disorder that is dangerous for society when its leaders are impaired by it. An impaired person has an exaggerated sense of self-importance and a lacking sense of reality. He is thirsting for attention and is easily controlled thereby. Among many other dangerous effects, the impairment causes illusions of omnipotence and an infantile sense of humanity, which, when combined with anger, arrogance, a lack of empathy, inner emptiness, insecurity, and so on, produces a person of tough-minded overbearance who is in pursuit of unrealistic fantasies and has great difficulties in maintaining healthy relationships. The American president falls into this category according to the symptoms of narcissistic impairment. When this happens to individual family relationships, the result is often tragic. But when this happens on the larger scene, and the impaired is the leader of one of the most powerful countries in the world, the consequences typically become catastrophic. We have seen the result in the actions of Hitler, and of the Roman Emperor Nero, and of others who became infamous for their narcissistic crimes. Except now, with the power of the weapons vastly expanded, the crimes committed with them become gargantuan and genocidal and infinite in scope. We face a crisis today of such immense proportions, because a severely mentally impaired person has been propelled onto the throne of one of the foremost powers in the world, who, sitting on this throne, has the button at his fingertip to set the world on fire and blow it up. We live like residents today of a gleaming apartment complex that has in each of its towers the basement filled with dynamite, and has wires leading from it to the janitor's pad that is occupied by an escapee from a mental ward. In his infantile fantasy, the janitor plays games with the button. How long will it take for the detonation to proceed? That is not a hypothetical question. But who owns the janitor? Who plays on his fantasies? Who has put the man there? These are not really hard questions to answer. It isn't hidden on the wider scene who aims to be the master of the world and aims to profit by unlocking the gate to Armageddon. Do the American electorate own the man they believe they have elected? Did they put him there? Is he answerable to them? The answer is no on all counts. A narcissist is a little man who is owned by whoever plays on his typical needs for aggrandizement, who thereby becomes his master. Apparently, there are a few of those. They all own the little man. He plays their game, the game they wish them to play. They selected the little man specifically for his impairment. They brought him in through the back door. They gave him the richest presidential election campaign in American history, interwoven with a long string of election irregularities that would fill volumes. He, in all respects that matter, is their man. They own him as a puppeteer, by whom they own the nation like so many puppets on a string. The American nation has ceased to own itself. It gave up its sovereignty. It gave it up to them. It is they who own the button, who run the game, who make the call. The final call before the doom may come in the dead of night, and when it comes, this call will be obeyed. No one would prevent it. No one could prevent it, as the nation no longer owns itself. Far too few nations remain sovereign in the Western world, if there are any at all. Most play the role of brother inmates in the zoo of oligarchy centered on the cesspool. A nation that has let go of its sovereignty salutes an empty shell. There is nothing there to salute. Few of the citizens themselves, if any, know who their real owners are. Who has requested the 4 aircraft carrier groups to be deployed that now are poised on the southern flank of Russia to threaten it? The threat leads to the center of the cesspool, where names no longer matter as there is no humanity left to carry those names. The button for the big war will be pressed in proxy for them, for the masters of empire. Society rarely ever owns itself anymore in ever-widening circles of regards. For whom do the soldiers die who rush to war today as they did then? Do any of the soldiers even wish to know? No nation is ever benefited from war. Peace alone benefits humanity. No war erupts when peace is cherished. War is a failing grade in societies mastering the art of building peace. When war is on the horizon, in most cases, society stands already as a defeated nation before the war begins. It stands defeated from within, defeated by indifference and self-denial. Society faces nuclear war on the same platform today as a defeated society, defeated by indifference. It is by indifference that a society loses its sovereignty, and subsequently to this loss loses its life. And so it will always be, long before a war begins, that society that commits the crime of war has lost its humanity. The dying and the destruction are always subsequent. We are back on this stage. We stand on this stage with the most deadly weapons ever. We do so because we lack the humanity in the heart to block the weapons. We say it is too hard. We say it can't be done. We have the means established for us, but we lack the heart to use the means. Indifference demands so much less. However, indifference comes with a price tag attached that in the nuclear-armed world becomes unbearable. The new chorus of war cries for a major attack on Iran need to be heard against this background. The war cries dominated the stage of the American-Israeli relations at the 2012 AIPAC conference in Washington. The war cries were issued over the non-existent threat of Iran building an atomic bomb that international inspectors have found no evidence for, similar to the hyped-up Iraqi weapons of mass destruction for which no evidence was ever found either. War cries are always built on lies. The lie is the hallmark of empire. Humanity is not warlike inherently. Empire is the force behind war and behind the criers who sound the trumpet of war. There is a strong movement against war in the US military, with some recognition that humanity is not inherently warlike. However, the role of empire behind the scene of the war is not recognized, nor is it recognized anymore that the chief war crier who launched World War II was financed in the power on the credentials of his war cries. The opposition to war today is shallow. It doesn't recognize the nuclear war danger behind the scene. It focuses on trivial issues. One of the trivial issues is that it would be difficult, if not impossible, to invade Iran. Another view is that Iran has not made a decision to weaponize its nuclear power development, but may instead be looking for a latent capability, like the Japanese, should a need for it arise, which the increasing sanctions would likely inspire. Another part of the opposition against war is focused on the economic cost. With the war against Iran being fought in the Gulf, the blocking of the flow of oil and gas through the Gulf would drive energy prices through the roof, up to 10 times the present price, which would wreck all the economies of the world. No one even hints at the possibility that the masters of the cesspool might be playing for this option in order to be able to steal ever more profits from society, even though the real target would be Russia, for which everything and everyone is on the table to be sacrificed in the vain attempt to keep the system of empire alive, which is presently collapsing by its inner emptiness. No one in the military has so far officially linked the cries for a big new war with the real objective to stage a nuclear war against Russia, China, and the rest of humanity to achieve the objectives of empire, just as World War II was staged for the objectives of empire in Hitler's days, which was then to destroy the economic development potential of Europe. Can anyone imagine what the world would have looked like if the Lautenbach objective of the Weimar Republic in Germany had succeeded, which was focused on the cooperative economic development of all of Eurasia on the basis of national credit creation? The monetarist system of empire would have vanished like a fading ghost and be forgotten. The world would then celebrate its third renaissance, instead of now facing the dawn of World War III. But this wasn't allowed. Instead, Hitler was financed into power, and Chancellor Lautenbach was pushed out of the way. As a result, all of Europe was sacrificed to be destroyed to save the empire from its impending doom. We are at the same turning point again, only this time the demanded sacrifice is larger. The sacrifice of 90% of humanity is on the table to save the system of empire from its inevitable extinction one more time. Of course, for obvious reasons, the underlying objective behind the war cries is carefully concealed. All the war-focused wrangling is concerned with trivial issues, rather than with the underlying issue. Fortunately, the trivial issues are strong enough to keep the war cries muted. In a major effort for war avoidance, a number of leading members of the military and intelligence community issued an open letter to President Obama to say no to the war drive The open letter presents quotes from some of the highest officials in U.S. government and the military that counter the war drive, and for good reasons. Admiral Mullen pointed out that the USA hadn't had a single official contact with Iran since 1979. He points out that the USA had closer contact with the Soviet Union during the darkest days of the Cold War. He doesn't say that the underlying reason why no contact has been made with Iran might be to keep the war potential alive. Evidently, if one talks face-to-face, one is less likely to talk with the gun, and that if one talks face-to-face honestly, the hidden reason for the war drive would come to the surface. Still, Admiral Mullen warns that the resulting war could be extremely dangerous. This warning didn't come from just an internet blogger. Admiral Mullen retired in 2011 as the highest-ranking officer of the U.S. Armed Forces, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, ending a 43-year career of service. Another quote in the open letter is from General Dempsey. He points out that a strike against Iran wouldn't be prudent and would be destabilizing and not achieve the long-term objectives. For this highly reserved statement in defense of peace, standing in direct opposition to his boss, the president, who is on the war path, General Dempsey has been vilified as treasonous. General Dempsey is putting his job on the line in speaking against war as the currently active highest-ranking officer of the United States Armed Forces, as if to say that war avoidance is the highest priority of military service for the nation and the world. Another high-ranking official speaking against war is the former Secretary of Defense, Robert Gates. His take is that the only long-term solution in avoiding an Iranian nuclear weapons capability is for the Iranians to decide that it isn't in their interest to do so. The acting Secretary of Defense warns that an attack would consume the Middle East in a confrontation and a conflict that we would regret. The former Commander-General of the Central Command, Anthony Zinni, warns about putting boots on the ground in a preventive attack, saying, "I tell my friends, if you like Iraq and Afghanistan, you'll surely love Iran." The great irony is that the lines of communications with the president are so thin or non-existent that it became necessary to speak to him via an open letter printed as a full-page ad in the Washington Post. But will he listen? His continued war cries seem to indicate that he is not listening to sanity, but listens instead to his masters who own him. The letter itself is far too polite in comparison with what it should have said. It stated the obvious, that military action is unnecessary and dangerous for both the USA and Israel. It should have said that it is a crime against humanity to even consider such actions. The letter urged the president to resist the pressure for a war of choice with Iran. It should have demanded the president's resignation for his evident commitment to open the floodgates to World War III, a nuclear war that only a few can survive, if indeed anyone can. The letter had 8 high-ranking names attached who were able to speak out from their retirement. 2 days after the letter appeared, another warning was issued in the House itself in the form of a resolution that warns the President to abide by the Constitution that vests the right to use military force with Congress and illegal without an act of Congress. The resolution states that it is the sense of Congress that, except in response to an actual or imminent attack against the territory of the United States, the use of offensive military force by a president without prior and clear authorization of an act of Congress violates Congress's exclusive power to declare war under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11 of the Constitution, and therefore constitutes an impeachable high crime and misdemeanor under Article 3, Section 4 of the Constitution. The American statesman and long-time political activist and scientific economist Lyndon LaRouche stated emphatically on hearing about the resolution, saying, "This bill could save the United States from destruction." The LaRouche Political Action Committee went immediately into high gear to mobilize support for this resolution, in addition to its already ongoing campaign to remove President Obama from office immediately by either impeachment or by application of Section 4 of the 25th Amendment of the Constitution, as the most crucial aspect of the fight to prevent a thermonuclear confrontation between the USA and Russia and China. The sad irony is that it shouldn't even be necessary to table a resolution in the House that demands that the President obey the Constitution on which the power of his office rests. The fact that such a resolution was put on the table indicates that the nation has lost much of its sovereignty and is therefore in grave danger, and the world with it. Because with the loss of its sovereignty, the nation loses its control over its immensely substantial military might, which now threatens to set the world on fire as it is imminent to be abused, and is in fact already being abused with the placement of 4 aircraft carrier fleets in the Middle East region for an offensive posture. It might well be that the House resolution was sparked by a dawning sense of sovereignty to reverse the country's subjection to empire that had already cut far too deep. Vladimir Putin's election to his 3rd term as President of Russia was fought and won on the platform of sovereignty, not the kind of sovereignty that empire seeks over the world to subdue it and bend its will and spirit, but the kind of sovereignty of the human being, standing free, tall, standing free from subjection to empire. A 100,000 people crowd had come on election night to hear Putin speak and to celebrate together Russia's victory on the road to sovereign independence, as the only nation in Europe still remaining sovereign, and proudly so. Putin was interrupted at one point when the crowd began chanting, "Putin, Putin, Putin, Putin." The people of Russia have demonstrated that it is possible for a nation to believe in itself and give itself a place in the sun that is evermore being denied to ever more nations under the machinations of the cesspool of empire. We have vast support from the vast majority of our voters, said Putin in his speech. His confidence reflects the fact that principle and its idea are one. Sovereignty is the native element of the human being. In proportion to which this fact becomes apparent and acknowledged, the unity of society comes to light in countless ways, in economic development, in commitment to the general welfare, and in political unity, both nationally and internationally. This was a test whether we are politically mature and independent enough, said Putin. And we have demonstrated that nobody can impose anything on us, nobody and never. We have demonstrated that our people are capable to tell one thing from another, a genuine desire to achieve modernity from political provocations that pursue only one goal, to destroy Russia as a nation and usurp power. Today, the people of Russia have demonstrated that such options, such scenarios, will never achieve success in our country. Never. We have won. I would like to thank you all. Evidently, some critical steps on the road to universal sovereignty for all humanity on this planet have been taken in this new old land on this day. Sovereignty is the opposite of empire. It is its doom. It is the path to freedom and a new renaissance. That day, there in Russia, may have seen the most important election victory for all of mankind that we have seen in our time to date. This is so because sovereignty is one of the great foundations for civilization that has been lost sight of in recent decades. It has been lost sight of throughout the entire Western world through cultural erosion, scientific degradation, and economic collapse, all intentionally perpetrated by the masters of empire as a means for enabling ever more wars to become possible. Nor will it be easy to reverse this erosion, because the principle of sovereignty is far more deeply rooted than in the political sphere. It isn't rooted in the political sphere at all, though it should be expressed there, while it no longer is. The principle of sovereignty, like the principle of love, is so substantial that if one breaks it, civilization disintegrates. However, both the principle of sovereignty and the principle of love are hard to define. I started an exploration of both of these universal principles back in the 1980s at the height of the Cold War. I started writing a novel about it that became a series of 12 novels. I named the series The Lodging for the Rose. It became an in-depth series. What came to light in the writing of the series is still relevant and may remain so until the ghost of war has faded into oblivion. This type of exploration became necessary because it makes no sense to explore war directly, which is illogical and irrational in itself. I had written a previous novel to explore nuclear war in retrospect, which can only be explored in retrospect because in a real war no one would remain alive to explore what went wrong. And even in fiction one can only explore the irrational in the most minimalist context, such as in exploring a sad little plan that should have been prevented but was allowed to proceed. But even here, the introspect aspect of exploring the inner dimension of our humanity became the valuable aspect of the work. This aspect of deeply exploring our humanity is key to the discovery of our sovereignty as human beings. Listen to the symphony of our humanity. In this symphony we are one with the universe itself. Like seeds are we, from an infinite fountain, carriers of secrets still unknown, sentinels of intelligence forever unfolding, prophets of the enduring, apostles of power in an endless landscape of good.